So today's topic tonight, Goose, is perfectionism. And so that actually leads me really nicely into my introduction here. So I have with us tonight a dear colleague of mine. Her name is Dr. Jessica Rohlfing Pryor. She is an expert in working with perfectionism. She does research in perfectionism, and she works clinically with perfectionism. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself here and share a little bit about how she got into perfectionism. And, you know, if you want to share maybe where you went to school and stuff too, Jessica, it's totally up to you. But I am super excited to have her on tonight and to share her expertise with all of you. I have the list of questions that all of you posted in Discord, and there will be a chance for you guys to ask questions in chat. But I'm going to try and get through the Discord question first, just as a head up. I know I do sound like a radio host often. So welcome, Jessica. Yeah. I'm super grateful to have you here.
Ryan, Dr. Mick, I'm pumped to be here, and my only thought right away is I wish I knew I had to prepare a handle, because on the fly I can't think of anything more creative than Jessica. So in the next hour I might find something better.
Sweet.
Really thrilled to be here. It sounds like you guys are jamming tonight.
It's always a good time. It's a lot of fun to have everybody in here. It's like this very close-knit community, and everybody's so wonderful and supportive and know who each other are at this point. And I know that many of them are excited. Kramer said Dr. Jess. How's that feel?
Yeah. Kramer, I'll go with it. Thank you.
There we go. All right, so we'll go Dr. Mick and Dr. Jess. There we go. First one in. And what's up, Floret? Okay, so I want to ask you first, Dr. Jess. I'll see if I can get in the hang of that. But I want to ask you first, how did you even get into wanting to research perfectionism? Can you maybe share a little bit about how you got into that and how that became your expertise?
You got it. It's now one of my favorite topics, but when I started researching it, I didn't really know it had a name. And in my area of psychology, we have jokes that your research is really me search. And so there's probably no personal accident that this ended up being what I began researching. But late 90s, back in the days of fanny packs, I was in graduate school and trying to figure out how to research some of the high achievement issues that come with really trying to be motivated in whatever realm of life. I played soccer in high school through college, and also tried to perform really well academically, and it just felt a little out of control in terms of how much pressure I had. And I ended up coming across a pretty obscure article in the DePaul University Library, probably around this time of night, maybe even this time of year, and learned that there were some researchers in Canada talking to how perfectionism could actually be a bad thing sometimes. And they, on a research level, had really done some of the groundwork for what a lot of the rest of us have done in the subsequent couple decades. So I started really trying to understand the theory behind perfectionism, and like a lot of people have asked the questions in the last day, what makes it bad? Mm-hmm. Is it different than OCD? All of those kinds of things. I've spent a good decade learning myself, and my biggest motivation to study this is that perfectionism at its worst can be really crippling. Mm-hmm. It can cause some people to be really avoidant of their work or their home responsibilities. It can cause other people to work so hard that they burn out. And so I have called it, and some of my colleagues have called it, a silent epidemic. And I'm really glad to talk about it tonight in relation to the unhealthy side.
Cool.
So thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to listen to you talk about it. Because perfectionism is not something I know a ton about, so I'm thrilled that we get to hear your perspective on this, especially since you have so much time invested in this. So I'm going to go through. I know that so that everybody knows, I gave her the questions ahead of time, and I'm going to go through them in the order that they were submitted on Discord. So I'm going to kind of go through those. She's going to answer your questions. And then again, if you have questions that come up while we're talking tonight, everybody, you can certainly write them in chat. If I miss them, I will get back to them. But I'm going to, it's going to be more of like me speaking with her, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and I might say a few things to you guys, but I really want to make sure that we have the airtime here while she's here. So I'll go with the first question here, which is, what is your greatest struggle when dealing with a person that has perfectionism or is struggling with perfectionism? That's a good one to get us kicked off with, I think.
Yeah, I'm loving this one. So I've already outed myself as a perfectionist. And so for me, actually, the first several years in working with perfectionistic clients, my greatest struggle was my own perfectionism. I knew how miserable that perfectionism at its worst can make people feel. And I was wanting so badly to help my clients that were going through that. And sometimes my own desire to be helpful, especially as a perfectionist, got in the way when things weren't going as fast or as good as I hoped they would through my help and support. And when I talk to perfectionism, I want to clarify for everybody that there are kind of two sides of it. And in the field, we call them technically adaptive perfectionism, which is the healthy side, and maladaptive perfectionism, which is the unhealthy side. And most people are really familiar with the healthy side. This is striving for really high goals, working really hard towards those goals, and then being able to rinse, repeat, do that again day after day. And I often, when I talk to students or other mental health providers around it, I ask them to think about adaptive or healthy perfectionism, kind of that elite athletes use. So elite college athletes, as well as professional athletes, they have to perform at this maximal level of excellence, not just once, all the time, and to get renewed contracts year after year.
Right.
And so the pressure is really palpable, super tangible. If you don't meet the grade, you're out. And these particular individuals who do well in elite athletics are those who are able to push really hard, and if they fail or if they don't make the goal, they're able to learn from it, recalibrate, and the most important part is forget it, so that they wake up the next day and they push hard again without this vault or archive of memories of failure. So that's the good side of perfectionism, and I would say there's no problem with anybody having that.
Okay.
The bad side, the unhealthy or maladaptive side of perfectionism is, as probably everybody knows where I'm going with this, it's not being able to shake off disappointment, mistakes, failures, shortcomings. And what can often happen is people spend time ruminating over those or working really hard to avoid them happening again. And so this archive of failures tend to be the way that they navigate life by carefully reviewing those failures again and again and again. So a highlight reel of everything that went wrong in order to try to make sure that those things or those errors don't happen again. And as you might imagine, this can feel pretty awful after a while, spending all the time not on your highlights reel, but on your bloopers reel. And people end up feeling pretty depressed at times, pretty anxious. Perfectionism is known, this kind of perfectionism is known to have major impact on self-worth, as well as just my general sense of whether or not other people like me as well. So usually with this come along things like my sense that I'm not good enough, my sense that other people also don't think that I'm good enough. I may try to avoid or have anxiety around performance tasks. This
Okay.
could be at work. This could be at home. I may also self-sabotage around performance tasks. So, for example, if I'm an athlete the night before a big game, maybe I don't get rest, or I start skipping practices because coach isn't going to play me anyway. I may on purpose go out partying rather than studying because I'm not going to get the grades that I wanted anyway. And so these self-sabotage techniques happen to typically be protective factors that help people avoid their worry that they're going to fail if they try really hard.
Okay, so it's
And
almost.
so I think.
Oh, sorry.
Go
No,
ahead.
I was just saying, so it's almost as if like it's almost an avoidance-seeking behavior that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Is that
That's
fair?
that's one side of it. So when I am self-sabotaging, that is an avoidance behavior that becomes self-fulfilling. So if my boss says I haven't gotten any emails back from you in 7 days, and I couldn't do them because I was worried about how to do them right, or I'm not turning anything in at school because I don't want to do that until it's right. You got it. Then I precipitate performance, quote unquote, experiences that other people will assess as less than optimal.
Okay.
Another aspect of this is I double down. So other people, I think that one of your other questions was, someone mentioned I could see people avoiding behaviors or avoiding performance tasks and other people throwing themselves into it. And both are equally unhealthy when they come along with this sense of I'm not good enough.
Okay. So is it fair to say then when it comes to perfectionism that the perfectionism itself, or like the perfectionistic tendencies, isn't the issue so much as the meaning processes and like actual behaviors that a person engages in around it?
I think the first thing you said, the meaning processes. So if I fail, which we all do, which I hope I'm not making you do at your game right now.
No, you're not at all. No way, it's going perfectly.
Nice. So we all fail. We all fall short. We all need to get up and try again. And the key part of the maladaptive or unhealthy perfectionism is that I get really upset about my failure, and I'm afraid it's going to happen again. And I'll go in one of two directions. Either I'll avoid trying, or I'll double down and I'll work really, really hard to make sure I don't fail the next time.
Okay. Oh, man, that's cool. And I could listen to you talk about this all night. I'm so excited. Okay. So where does perfectionism stem from?
What a great question. And this is something that those of us in the field are spending a little bit more attention on right now, because a really great study came out earlier this year saying that the prevalence rate of this unhealthy side of perfectionism is actually increasing with younger birth cohorts. So right now, the millennials have a higher prevalence rate of perfectionism than Gen X or Gen Y did.
Okay.
And one of the common reasons that's talked about is parental pressure and parental criticism. Some people grow up in families where nothing but the best was expected. My parents may have withdrawn their love or support from me, or punished me somehow if I wasn't athletically or educationally obtaining the level of performance that they expect. Parents may also double down on their concern if a child gets a grade slightly less than what their parents expected. Well, what's wrong with you? How do we help support you to get the next level? And so parental criticism tends to really underscore for people in such families, okay, the way that I make mom, dad happy, grandma, extended family, is to perform really well. And when I don't perform really well, they're going to let me know, and they're going to ask what the heck's wrong with me. And a lot of us may see that at child sporting events We may see that on report card day.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly see that in the workplace as well. That family members sometimes get really critical when other family members don't make the mark. And so to avoid that criticism moving forward, some individuals work twice as hard to do it perfectly so they don't get criticized or scolded the next time. So that's one, parental criticism.
Okay.
Another one is actually like genetics or heritability. This maladaptive side of perfectionism seems to be a thing.
Oh no, I lost her. Ah! No! What's going on? Okay, hold on everybody. Sit tight. Oh man. No! Alright, hold on. Oh my god. That was going so well. Hold on, gonna text her. Man. Oh, what a bummer. Nightbot is AWOL. I haven't had a chance to recalibrate Nightbot. So hold on a second. We're going to get her back in here in a second. Oh, man. What a bummer. I know it is anarchy here. Gaming Gappy, I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you for stopping by to share that. That is so awesome. Good on you, man. Alright, hold on. I'm going to get Dr. Pryor in here again. Oh my god. See, I could listen to her talk about this forever. I love listening to people who are experts in what they talk about. Oh, man. Zoom was like, oh, your free trial was expired. Like, I don't even know what that means. Yeah, I know. I really do too, Jinx. Like, I was all into that because I was like, oh my god. We'll get her back. Yeah, Zoom is it's a video and audio software. Welcome to everybody who I didn't have a chance to say hi to because the interview had started. Meeting code is invalid. Okay. Oh, there we go. Wait a minute. Do we have you? Alright, she just joined, so we might be good here. Yeah, it's like Skype gaming, but it's HIPAA compliant, which is kind of cool. Not that anything we're talking about right now. Yeah, I don't hear her yet either, so it's alright. We're gonna... Yeah, no problem, Hoffman. I'll see it.
Hey, Ryan, I think I'm back.
There we go. You are back.
So sorry.
No problem. No, that was on my end. It was a bug on my end.
Well, and Zoom could have been like, we're talking about genetics. Let's switch the topic.
Yeah, right. Well, that was what's funny is I was like, as soon as you said there's heritability, I was getting all excited. And then everybody here was like, oh my god, like we really wanted to hear that, and it dropped out. So by all means, feel free to pick up there with perfectionism being linked to genetics, because I would love to hear about that. I think as much as everybody else. So please continue. Now that we've made it.
That could be my move. I just don't finish, and then you guys have to invite me back another time.
You know what? That could be arranged regardless.
Yes. So, all right, then I'll share the genetics part.
Cool.
So there are heritability factors that seem to suggest that perfectionism is passed down in personality,
Oh, wow.
as well as passed down in families through other more complex genetic associations with one's problem-solving skill sets and sense of attention to detail. And so really early in the stages of research around that, like many other things in psychology, we first know that things are heritable, and then we try to figure out why based on gene encoding. But for right now, it's embedded for sure in personality and cognitive processing.
Wow, that is so cool.
Yeah, and there's still other factors, and one other one is social learning. So a lot of us, when we go through life, if we have successes, minor successes when we're playing a quiz game with a friend, or major successes professionally or personally, we often get positive attention from other people for those. And that naturally, being a social species, feels really great. Mm-hmm. And what can happen over time in life, we naturally wire to try to seek out additional praise and attention from other people. And so there are some people who may not have had parental criticism growing up, or parents who really had particular harsh standards mm-hmm. around performance. And I may not have grown up in a family of other perfectionists. But wow, every time I do well at school, or every time I do well professionally, people love me up, and that feels really great. And so I'm going to double down and keep trying to do that as I go through life. And what can happen there is, for a while, that feels great. I'm working really hard, kind of busting my butt, getting great successes. People are telling me how much they love me. And then it can turn into a sense of pressure. Oh gosh, what happens if I can't sustain this track record? Will they still love me? Will everybody walk away? Huh. And a lot of the clients that I work with are clients individuals who are in high achieving careers, mm-hmm. and they worry very much about kind of when the other shoe will drop, and they do hit a failure moment. It's not an if, it's a when, and will people walk away?
Huh. Is there a common? This is kind of me following up here. Is there like a common time where that switch flips, where all of a sudden it goes from this like really nice reinforcement to a sense of pressure? Like, do we know much about kind of when that happens for people, or how it happens?
The how would be really embedded in social learning theory. The when depends on the person. Okay. And certainly the environmental circumstances. So my understanding is right now we couldn't really find any research that said, between age 14 and 18 is when this pressure switch flips, or okay. between 21 and 26. It's really, it seems to be well informed by the social messages around me, how long certain messages have been there, how long I've had performance success, and at what point I internally start thinking about the likelihood of failure. Some of us have performance success and we never think about failure. I think that might be narcissism.
Perhaps.
So some of us don't have this problem. So you could be a perfectionist or a narcissist. You got to pick.
Yeah. Which one you want? Okay, cool. I appreciate that answer. I was very curious. So what are things that other people might unknowingly do that could negatively impact somebody struggling with perfectionism?
Yes, I loved this question when I saw it on your list. No one has ever asked me this.
Wow, really?
And truly, not even my cats, no one. And I think this is really important because there is one huge thing that people say to perfectionists around their worries, which is, it'll be okay, or it'll be fine, or you'll be fine, or you'll get through it. And that is so invalidating to the fear of failure that perfectionists walk around with every single day.
Okay, so if nothing else, if you know a person who is struggling with perfectionism, don't say it's going to be okay.
You got it.
Okay.
Don't say you're gonna do great. You always do. That adds more pressure. Don't say, I know you got this, or I believe in you. That adds more pressure.
Wow.
Don't say, you've never failed before. That will add more pressure.
Okay. So I'm a big
Another
believer.
thing,
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh,
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so maybe this is related to what you were about to say, but I'm a big believer that it's important to know what to replace something with. So if that's the message that we should not send, what are helpful messages that could be sent to a person who's struggling with perfectionism so that we could maybe avoid adding to that pressure?
You got it. So if this is a pressure that my child is facing, or my significant other, or a good friend, instead of saying, you got this, don't worry about it, meeting them where they're at and letting them know that you hear their worry. So, okay, you're scared about this. Okay, you're worried you're going to fail this time. Wow, that sounds like it's pretty high stakes.
Okay.
So really validating that perfectionist fear. Some of us, at least on paper, look like we're kicking butt at life. And so it's really easy for people to say, what's your problem? You're doing so well. And that can be so undermining. And others of us may be struggling so much with perfectionism that we're paralyzed, and it's not easy for us to do our schoolwork or hold down a consistent career. And for people who are experiencing that, not only would I suggest that friends, family members, loved ones don't say, you'll be fine, but they also really encourage that person to work with a mental health professional around trying to get unstuck from some of that paralysis.
Awesome. Oh man, that's so cool. Okay, that's good. I honestly, it's so interesting to hear you talk about that, because I mean, even I would probably feel really compelled to say, you'll be okay. Like, it's amazing how just innate of a response that is, and how
yes,
it's just like it's just a go-to there, and to know that actually might cause a problem, I think is so helpful. So I'm really glad that Finn asked that question.
Well, I'm thinking as mental health providers, think of all the clients that you and I have probably said that to.
Oh God, yeah.
You're going to do great. You're going to be great. And we mean that with best of intentions.
Absolutely.
And with this particular population, that is one of the biggest ways to just crank up the pressure.
But that is so good to know. Oh my God, I will not forget that. What is the connection, if any, between perfectionism and mental illness?
Yeah, great question again. Perfectionism is what we call the really formal transdiagnostic. And so perfectionism is a personality presentation, a personality trait or characteristic that can exist separate from any mental health problem, or can exist alongside almost any mental health problem. So transdiagnostic, I could be perfectionistic and also have anxiety issues. I could be perfectionistic and also have depression or bipolar disorder.
Okay.
What we also know is that perfectionism sometimes precedes mental health disorders. And sometimes it's a result of mental health disorders. Huh. So it kind of comes in all over the place.
Okay.
We do know that the most common mental health disorders and concerns that are correlated with perfectionism, so the ones that are most likely to be experienced by people who also identify as maladaptively perfectionistic, are anxiety disorders, depression, anorexia nervosa,
Okay.
possibly some of the other eating disorders, and OCD in particular.
Okay, that would make sense. And I know we're going to get to a couple questions about that. So, well, actually, you know what? Why don't I jump to that question really quick since you just said that? The question was, is there a connection between OCD? And there was also another one that said, how do you differentiate between perfectionism and OCD? And so maybe kind of those two questions at the same time may be helpful.
Yeah. So perfectionism is definitely a separate thing from OCD, but there are parts of them that can look kind of similar. If I have obsessive compulsive disorder, I may have compulsions to get things right. I may have compulsions to get right the way my house is organized, or get right the way that my pens are lined up on my desk before I leave work, or get right the way that I touch elevator buttons, or pack my bag. And perfectionism has a similar feature, wanting to get things right. For perfectionists, the wanting to get things right is can often be around goal setting. So I have a goal of elite performance professionally, personally, academically, and those are the things I really fixate on getting right. Whereas with obsessive compulsive disorder, sometimes these compulsions can take over and end up not necessarily making sense to anybody other than the person with OCD. I may have to touch that light fixture or that light switch a certain number of times in order to get it just right, and then it feels right inside. That kind of compulsion and sense of if it's right or not isn't necessarily related to an objective outcome and something that someone else could see and also agree, yes, that's been done right.
Okay.
I think that's the shortest way of discriminating between the two.
Okay.
Without putting everybody through the torture of what I talk to my graduate students about in psychopathology.
Right, the full gauntlet there. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're inherently different, and they come from inherently different motivations. As many of the people here tonight may know, obsessive compulsive disorder is related a bit to a sense of anxiety and needing control over things that feel out of control. And so some of the ways in my behavior that I may regain a sense of control may not necessarily be related to performance the way perfectionism is.
Okay. So performance being the main differentiator kind of between the two, perhaps, even though they might be commonly coincide with each other.
You got it.
Cool. Very cool. How can we approach a loved one when their perfectionism is negatively affecting our own mental health? So I think this question was asking, like, if a person's perfectionism is affecting you, how do you handle that?
Is that question coming from my husband? Is he on?
He snuck in here.
Dr. Mack, that wasn't part of our agreement. Really good question. I think I'm looking at that from the perspective of a mental health provider, and thinking to a lot of my work in helping clients communicate with each other. I do a lot of work with couples, and thinking to relationship and some of the key relationship skills that we as mental health providers tend to want to encourage clients to use with each other are skills around honesty. And I once recently heard, I don't remember where, but the difference between honesty and brutality is gentleness. And so thinking about how do you honestly tell that person that they're affecting you, and how do you do it with gentleness, I think would be one of the best ways to kind of conceive of it internally. It might be also helpful to know that family member or loved one with perfectionism probably already worries that
Sure.
that they are not meeting your standard or they are disappointing the people around them. Perfectionists, the kind that I that study, maladaptive perfectionists, are really sensitive to rejection, particularly from their loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of feedback could feel pretty devastating and really underscore a person's worry that they've had all along, that their partner doesn't want to be with them, or that they drive their sibling nuts. So the gentleness here is key, and talking to it from a perspective of, as best as one can, love and empathy. Hey, this must be really hard for you. And I think that because it's even hard for me. It's hard for me to watch, or it's hard for me to be around you when I know you're struggling so hard. Are there ways that, we together can try to make some changes or get some support together around this? I don't want you to be struggling with this anymore.
Okay, so that we message in sort of an establishing of some level of attachment and gentleness in the way that you approach it. But I think what I hear you saying, which I certainly appreciate, obviously, as a relationally minded therapist as well, is that it is okay to share that it's affecting you. It's just the way in which you share that it's affecting you that's really important. And I think that's a huge point, because I think sometimes it's easy to get stuck in a position where you feel like you can't say anything and you sort of lose your own boundaries. And that can, cause all sorts of problems too, and harbor resentment and all sorts of stuff. So it's okay to talk about it. Just, be mindful of the way that you're talking about it.
You got it.
Cool. Love it. Could you speak to the relationship between extreme perfectionism and extreme avoidance?
Yep, they're married for about half of us. Okay. So extreme perfectionism takes it has two different looks.
Okay.
One is this extreme avoidance. The avoidance comes from anxiety that I'm not going to get it right, overwhelm about how I can make it good enough, perhaps paralysis about where to start. And so extreme avoidance is actually a coping mechanism to try to deal with all of those uncertainties and anxieties. So, yep, for about half of us, that's our MO. And the other half of the individuals with maladaptive perfectionism, they have, instead of extreme avoidance, they have extreme commitment. So they will double down on that work by spending 2, 3, 4 hours cultivating that particular email and rereading it and re-editing that sentence or re-editing that particular phrase, and then rereading it again before they start another sentence or a phrase. And so they're putting in as much energy as they can. They're really trying to succeed, and they're putting in so much effort that's kind of backfiring, because it's normal for people to get really tired and exhausted from putting in that much work. And it's hard to keep up with the pace of life when I'm putting in 2 to 3 hours on a particular email and I have 50 more emails to respond to today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just a horrible compounding positive feedback loop there.
You got it.
So I want to say to the chat that if you have a question that you want to add, I do want to be, I'm sure that all of us would probably love to be on here for 3 hours talking about it, but I do want to say, if you have a question you want to add, you can add it to the Discord. If we can't get to it, I will be happy to ask Dr. Pryor to join us again at some point in the future, just so that you all know. But I am watching the chat, but the chat's not the best way to get an extra question in there. It's to get to the Discord. So make sure you follow the link that's in here. For those of you who might be new in here, we're hanging out with Dr. Jessica Rohlfing Pryor, who is an expert in perfectionism and does research and works clinically with perfectionism. So we're going through a bunch of questions that the community has had for her. So Let's see. Is there a relationship between perfectionism and ADHD?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay.
Is the short answer. So since perfectionism is transdiagnostic, it could mean that people who experience ADHD may also be perfectionistic, but they don't tend to run together the way perfectionism often does with, in particular, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and OCD.
Okay, cool. Let's see. I think you answered this question already, but let's see. About is perfectionism always bad? Can there be a healthy amount of perfectionism in a person? I don't know if you have anything extra you want to say about that.
I think the one extra thing, if I can,
yeah, no, by all
means, is the difference between healthy and unhealthy perfectionism is somebody's ability to be able to be open to failure and bouncing back.
Ooh,
and so how do we learn how to fail gracefully and not stab ourselves and be self-critical and brutal with ourselves forevermore? How do we learn how to make mistakes and honor that as part of learning? And people who know that skill, that very difficult skill, are really good at adaptive perfectionism. And that particular skill is one of the key skills I work on with my clients. How do we own failure? How do we practice failure? And so that is a big distinction there.
Do you do a level of like exposure to failure? Like, do you do any scaffolding around that of like controlled failure?
You got it.
Cool.
So I have worked with clients who are terrified to apply to certain positions that they're probably very well qualified for, because they're afraid they'll fail. And so we jump on monster.com or another website, and they click 20 random jobs that they submit their resume to, and we wait for the rejections to come in. And we celebrate them like no other. I guess going back to the 90s, like it's 1999. We do a lot of celebration around the rejections and around the fact that, like, yes, there's a rejection experience, and you're going to rock it out. And go us. I also ask clients when they do therapy homework to on purpose put mistakes in and leave them in the homework. There are other clients, if they agree to write a particular kind of journal with me via email, that they write a particular journal entry in 5 minutes. They don't reread it, and they send it with all the typos and ugly that's in there.
Okay.
And we celebrate that. We talk about how they can, on purpose, say awkward or what they think are stupid things to the receptionist where I work, or at the coffee shop, or to a loved one, and see if people turn green and run away from them the way that they think they might.
Okay.
So you got it. It's there's a lot of fun exposure therapy that goes along with it.
That is so cool.
If I remember correctly, going back to one of those questions, what's one of the hardest things working with perfectionists? Getting people on board.
Yeah, sure.
With practicing failure. There are some clients who think, if I work with you, are you going to teach me that it's okay to just to lay on my couch and not do anything with my life for the next 2,000 years? And the answer to that, of course, is no. But we gotta help you get out of the funk that you're in.
And something I'm hearing, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, because something I'm hearing maybe that's a really important, what do I want to call it? A differentiator is, you were talking earlier about how you don't want to say to somebody who's struggling with perfectionism, it's going to be okay. But it seems like when there is a failure, it's important to highlight that they are okay in the context of a failure. Is that an important discrepancy, or am I hearing that wrong?
It's important to highlight that they are rocking out the failure.
Okay.
So they may not feel okay.
Sure.
They may feel awful and like this is the worst experience, and they're firing you immediately after this therapy session.
Okay.
And my job would be to really congratulate them for enduring the failure. It doesn't have to be pretty. It does not have to be fun. Usually it feels like hell. And then ask them to continue to experience and experiment with failure outside of our session. So picking things during the week that they could deliberately belly flop at.
Sure.
Another way of doing this kind of work, I think one of the later questions was like, how do you work with someone with perfectionism? So some of this exposure. A second thing that is really common is teaching people to experiment with their ideas that they have to be perfect in all the things. So maybe I want to be a really perfect spouse. To be a perfect spouse, do I have to every night cook a 7-course meal and I iron the pillowcases? And each of us come up with our own really high expectations and standards for self when we want to connect with another person. And so I will talk with clients through, is it okay if you're a really awesome partner in these ways, but you don't iron the pillowcases? Is it okay if once in a while you make the 7-course meal and other times you get takeout? And we talk through just experimenting with that one time and seeing how that goes. Similarly, if one of my perfectionistic clients is really high functioning at work and they're kicking a lot of butt, does that mean that they also have to come home and like have the most organized shower caddy the world has ever seen? No.
Right.
And so really experimenting with just doing things differently. I ask clients to kind of brush their teeth in a way where they miss this one part. So really setting it up to just have experiences with letting go of things. And that's so logical and so easy sounding. And if we went to a bookstore in the self-help section, there would be like 17 different books about that. And the doing of it is so much harder than the thinking through it. I imagine everybody here is like, well, of course, that's what you do. Easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Speaking from personal experience, yeah.
Well, and it sounds like, I mean, one of the things I talk about a lot, it's, in my work with anxiety, is helping people build a level of distress tolerance. And it sounds like that's to some extent what you're doing there.
You got it.
Distress tolerance in the context of failure. So.
You got it.
Okay, let's see. Why are artists and writers prone to perfectionism? Does this coincide with creatives having a higher rate of depression?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. I want to come back just for these questions. These questions are so fun.
I know.
So yes, artists and creative types have higher rates of depression. Also have higher rates of suicidal ideation, and perfectionism is also a common experience of creative types. Several books written about this, not necessarily by perfectionism researchers, around how creative types are incubating on an idea internally, and that takes long enough to get to a point where it's like, okay, yeah, I've got that right in my head. And then regardless of art medium, being able to translate that outside of my head at the level of sophistication that I store it in my head is insanely difficult. Some of the master class artists in the world, Michelangelo being one example, would paint over and paint over and paint over and paint over and paint over his own work, which is why he was so behind on a lot of his commissions when he passed away. He had to get it right. And there is an informal assumption, I'm not sure I've read this in historical and in art history books, but that the devil in the Sistine Chapel ceiling is supposed to be his representation of this torture within himself to get it right.
Interesting. Huh. Wow. That's okay.
I
didn't
think
know
so.
that.
Yep.
That's so
like,
cool. I'm just letting
dropped
that
a
sink
mic
in.
over here.
Yeah. Holy cow. That is really neat. Can you speak?
And so other people may say to these artists or creative types, it's so beautiful, it's so stunning, but they know what's in their head, and they know whether or not that's been translated.
Yeah.
And that can be really, really plaguing. Sometimes you see this in young children as well. There's this tremendous frustration in translating in three-dimensional space what they're trying to, what they're thinking to create.
That makes, as an artist myself, I could certainly, well, at least back in the day, I don't do it as much anymore, but I can certainly, that really like resonates with me a lot, of like when you just can't get what's in your brain out onto the paper or out onto the canvas. Man, can that be frustrating.
Yeah, and you hear it in artist presentations as well. Just to riff on this for a little bit,
yeah,
I think of Chris Martin from Coldplay talks a lot about his insomnia, and his insomnia around thinking. He does interviews that seem to me, I don't know him personally, but seem to me to hint at some of his frustration in being able to quote unquote get it out. Sylvia Plath, as we know, a well-known American writer who ended up taking her life, wrote very explicitly about perfectionism often, and that she lived under a shadow of fear. Quote from her, a fear of falling short of some abstract perfectionism. And it plagued her throughout her life. She expressed it very vocally. Emily Dickinson, a famous poet, never showed anybody her work. It was published, of course, upon her death,
right?
Because she didn't think that it was in the light of day. Many other, I'm sure that all of us might think too that this is the case of. They'd rather burn it down than represent something that wasn't exactly as they conceived.
Yeah. Man, I could listen to you talk about this all night. I do want to be respectful of your time. We're at 12:30. I mean, do you have a couple more in you, or how are you feeling?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right.
I'm so pumped.
All right.
And
cool.
How are people doing? Are there questions? Are they feeling kind of like over it?
Well, no, there have been, people seem to really be listening intently. I mean, I'm seeing comments in here about, where people are just sort of saying, oh, this really resonates with me. This is something that sticks out to me. I think people are really enjoying it. So everybody's saying, awesome. This is awesome. We're pumped. We're doing fine. We love her enthusiasm. Yeah, there's all sorts of positivity in here about what's happening. So all
right, then let's keep going if you're okay with it.
I'm totally fine with keeping going with it. So, and there have been a couple new questions that have popped into the Discord. So we'll have a chance to be able to get to this, to get to these. So can you speak to, did I just ask no, I didn't ask the perfectionism. Okay. Can you speak to perfectionism being an instigator of procrastination, identifying the problems, and any advice on mitigating that?
Procrastination is hugely common in perfectionists who cope with the pressure of performance by avoiding it. Okay. Which is probably the definition of procrastination. So avoiding a thing because I have anxiety about the thing. And with perfectionists, I'm kind of torn on whether or not this is quote unquote a bad thing for my perfectionistic clients. And I'll explain why, and then I'll certainly answer the question. So using an example of perhaps I have a work project or a school project that's due in 6 weeks. If I'm a perfectionist and I jump on that project right away, I'm going to be doing that 24/7 for 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And the last minute before it's due, I'm going to turn it in, and I will be exhausted because I just mismanaged my time by giving beast mode for 6 weeks to that particular project at the absence of everything else in my life.
Mm-hmm.
That, I would argue, isn't particularly healthy. And so the opposite of that, and the ways that many perfectionists end up becoming procrastinatory, is because they know that that's not sustainable. It's really difficult to push at that level for that long. And so, okay, I will instead wait until 2 or 3 days before this thing is due, and then I'm going to let all hell break loose, go into beast mode, get it done. And I've only done that then for a couple of days rather than obsessed, Michelangelo style, over this particular project for 6 straight weeks. Many maladaptive perfectionists, once they start a project, their brain will not release it until the due date. And so this can get really complicated for a lot of reasons. I know in many industries in American society, it's like this really valuable thing for people to turn things in early. Like he's on top of his stuff. You turn that in 6 weeks early. Procrastinatory perfectionists and perfectionists who are really worried about getting it right, typically, exceptions every rule, but typically don't turn that thing in early. No way.
Right.
It'll slide in the last moment that it's due. And the difference will be some of us did spend 6 weeks on it and we're exhausted, and others of us spent 6 hours or 6 minutes because we used procrastination to conserve energy. So that's my first thought. It's kind of come up this year after working with perfectionists for so long. I think there is a real coping gain for some perfectionists who choose to do things at the last minute because they're not painstakingly working on it for weeks and weeks and weeks. But to the particular question, how can perfectionists stop with the procrastination? I think this is a really tricky question.
Sure.
In our field, there are all sorts of cognitive behavioral techniques around time management and breaking projects into smaller pieces that in theory are super logical and helpful, but I typically have not found to be helpful for my perfectionistic clients. They tend to be the people who, my clients tend to be the ones who know all of those skills, have been shown them 17 times, probably as early as elementary school or high school. But there just there's something that doesn't click with that. It's not how they work. And so I find for my clients in getting to the root of their procrastination, I'm also needing to, with them, get to the root of their perfectionism.
Sure.
What is the source of that? What is the motivation of that? And as we work on that root, some of that procrastination may fold away on its own, or it becomes one of our exposure experiments, starting a thing early, submitting it early, and just letting it go.
Okay.
So there's real attachment to product that usually is linked to procrastination that we try to unwind.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Let's see. What can perfectionists do to prevent perfectionism from impacting their self-worth?
This is such a good and important question. Often, perfectionists' self-worth is hugely around performance. Taken from a colleague's playbook on perfectionism, a pair of colleagues in Australia, they asked their clients to draw a really big circle on a piece of paper and ask how much of their self-worth is related to their performance. Performance in school, performance with relationships, performance professionally, financially. And often clients will say, I don't know, 70%, some will say 80, 90, 100% of my self-worth is related to performance.
Okay.
And how well I'm doing in life. And then we ask them to draw a second really large circle and ask if you could change that in a way that would just help you feel like life was better balanced for you and that your well-being was better than it is now. What other things would you let count toward your self-worth?
Ooh, I like that a lot.
And it's interesting what people put in. They put in all the non-performance things that freaking matter. Like how much my dog loves me, how I nursed my mom through her surgery, how I make time for my yoga routine every day. It's really cool to see what people would want to put in as part of the measure of their self-worth. And then we talk about how to make more room for those things.
Oh man, I like that a lot. That's really cool. I have a lot of Aussies that hang out in chat, so I think like the nice little shout out to some Australians. I think is really cool.
Awesome. Some of the best perfectionism researchers are actually from Australia.
That's so cool. Do you have a couple names that you could name drop off the top of your head that might be helpful for people? Okay.
Yeah. So one is Sarah Egan, Sarah Sarah Egan, Egan, and Tracy Wade, Wade, and Roz Shafran, Shafran.
Awesome. Cool. Shout out to the Aussies in here. It's in Australia. I come on at reasonable hours, so I think that's why I get a lot of Australians in here.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What time is it in Australia right now, anyway?
I don't know. Hey, somebody who's in Australia, tell me what time it is. We'll see. We'll see what we get here. Because I always forget what the time shift is, but I know it's actually.
I know it's
reasonable.
massive.
Oh yeah. Okay. How do you tend to approach? You talked about this a little bit, but I'll ask it again just in case there's anything you want to add to it. How do you tend to approach treating a client with perfectionism? Like overall, what does the course of treatment look like? It's a client who's perfectionist but puts. Let's see. There's like a part 2 to this. Let's see if it maybe adds a little bit of context here. Is a client who's perfectionist but puts 110% and wears themselves out, stresses themselves out, trying to attain perfectionism, classified as the same way as someone who's perfectionist, and since nothing can technically become perfect, they give up before they start? Are both approaches equally unhealthy? And like I said, I think you talked a little bit about this, but if there's anything you'd like to add to that, please by all means do so.
I think that person needs to join our research team because they are speaking to the two sides of the coin of maladaptive perfectionism. So, yep, some clients come in and they're absolutely that first description, and some come in and they're absolutely the second, and both are similarly tormented by perfectionism and similarly suffering. So the outcome is the same, even though the process looks very different.
Cool.
And so to the I think the other question was around like, what does therapy look like?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, you know what, that probably, yeah, I think that's embedded within that question. So this is probably a good time to say that if you want to share that.
You got it. I think within this field right now, we're trying to find the best answer to that question.
Okay.
And along with a lot of other presentations that people may bring or worries they bring to their mental health providers, there are lots of different ways to get to the same thing. So there are lots of equally effective ways to treat depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or ADHD. Similarly, lots of different effective ways to treat perfectionism. What is most important about it is that treatment is customized to that person, so that, in my opinion, the provider is very aware of and knowledgeable around how that perfectionism developed. So going back to what we talked about a bit ago, is that did that perfectionism develop because of parental criticism? Did that perfectionism develop based on social learning?
Mm-hmm.
Or were there any messages that you received in life that have really stood out, that have motivated you or made you believe that perfectionism is the only option? So really being thorough in the understanding of where it has come from,
Mm-hmm.
and how it has, how this particular person wants to change it in their life. So some clients will come in and say, yeah, I've got all that stuff, but I just need you to help me perform even better than I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, honestly, I'm not the therapist for you, because I'm not here to make you a better perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
If you're the kind of perfectionist that I work with, this is a thing that hurts, and there are ways that it is not convenient and it's not worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there are ways that your perfectionism gets in the way, let's talk about it, and let's use empirically understood and evidence-based treatments to try to help you ease suffering around the parts of the perfectionism that isn't working. So I don't think that someone could leave then therapy not being a quote-unquote perfectionist,
Mm-hmm.
but they could leave therapy being a perfectionist that has a lot of well-being and a lot less suffering than they originally had. And maybe once in a while that perfectionism will creep back in again.
Sure.
But they're running it rather than it running them.
I like that, kind of having some level of power within that framework instead of being slave to it.
Yes.
Yes, I like that. I'm all about that personal empowerment, so that certainly resonates with me. Can you speak to some strategies to deal with the perception that even with arbitrary effort dedicated to an idea, the reality will never measure up to what's in my head? I know you talked a little bit about this with the creative process, but maybe if you have anything that you'd like to add to that in terms of like really trying to get that image out of the head onto the paper and coming to terms with that.
So if I understand the question, it's how do I manage the fact that I may not be able to get it out of my head and onto the paper?
Yeah, and how do I cope with the reality of that?
Yeah. I am not trying to cop out of answering this question. It's a really sophisticated question, though. And usually when the graduate students I teach ask sophisticated questions, my first response is, it depends. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to throw out, it depends here.
Fair enough. I say it a lot on stream, so that's totally okay.
Okay. I'm going to double down. It depends. In my experience, it really depends on the client, mm-hmm. and how the perfectionism is kind of wired in that particular person.
Totally fair. No, it depends. I think, I know it can be a frustrating answer, but it really is true that like context and kind of what goes in behind a person's process with that matters very much. So I certainly appreciate that answer. Cool. We're into some of the new ones now that have come in tonight. So
cool.
So here we go. Can you speak about perfectionism and motivation? Not starting an activity due to not being able to create something the first time perfectly.
So there is a really interesting kind of motivation pattern that maladaptive or unhealthy perfectionism can display, which is I have maximal motivation. Like I will throw 100% of everything I am at a thing, mm-hmm. if I know it's going to work out. And if I'm uncertain it's going to work out, I'm not going to throw myself onto that stage for everybody to watch me crash and burn. Mm-hmm. And so it may not be, for some of us, it may be lack of motivation. For others of us, it may be self-preservation and avoiding complete shame and rejection and embarrassment in front of other people. Mm-hmm. For others of us, we get so frustrated that we know we're not going to be able to give 100% and kill it, that frustration turns into just complete lack of the motivation. So instead of being frustrated, which is a high energy state, I'm going to become non-motivated, which is a low energy state, and my body can actually sustain that a lot longer than it can my state of frustration.
Ooh, looks like all right, so I missed somebody's question. Who did I miss? Oh my God, Victoria, I'm so sorry that I missed that. Well, Victoria, so are you talking about, which one did I miss? The differentiation between perfectionism and obsessive compulsive disorder. We actually talked about, Victoria. So check the video on demand, because we actually talked about that earlier on, as a heads up. So I lumped it in with another question that was really similar, Victoria. Let's see. Do most perfectionists know that they're perfectionists?
I
like that question a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just do you know it? Is this a thing that you're aware of? I don't know. There's something beautifully simple about that question that I like a lot.
Do I know who I am, really?
Right.
In my experience with clients, yes, but they may not know the word perfectionist.
Okay.
So they know what all of this feels like. They have examples upon examples of how they've endured it in their life, but they don't. There may be clients that don't know this word or don't think of perfectionism in this way. So my experience has been the vast majority of people I've worked with, and perhaps it's because I work with people who are so sick of suffering and are feeling so miserable that they end up calling me, that they know something is just not working and needs to change. So my experience has been 100% of my clients know something is off. Okay. An interesting related question is whether or not they want to do anything about it. So there are some clients who know that this is how they are, whether or not they identify with that word perfectionist or perfectionism, but it's brought them such success in life that they're pretty reticent or terrified or stubborn against trying anything else.
Of course.
Because what if, Dr. Jessica, Dr. Jess, I try a different strategy. Dr. Mick, what if I try a different strategy and it doesn't work, and I end up really falling on my face? I'm not willing to make that sacrifice or take that risk.
Yeah, change it. Oh yeah, it's sort of like, are you ready for what that change actually might entail? Are you ready to be okay with being less than perfect? Especially if it served you well, and I'm big on relational reinforcement, which I'm sure you are too, and it's kind of like the social learning part that you're talking about. If it's been reinforced for however many years that that's a really successful way to engage in work and relationships, and you have some form of success in whatever way you've conceptualized it, it's going to be that much harder to break through because you know what to expect from yourself and you know how it is. So I really appreciate that answer a lot. Is there something like perfectionism burnout where a perfectionist can take like a 180 attitude in their work?
Yeah. I think I might have gone through that the last couple of years. Whoever this is, I should have paid to be my therapist. Yep. So there are individuals who grow through this process. Just like they may grow through other things, grow through their grief and loss, or grow through depression, or grow through their anxiety experiences or eating disorder. And for whatever reason, some individuals decide, I just can't do it this way anymore. I want to try something different. That's kind of a radical approach, and some people do that. Other people may start to just on their own experiment with doing things differently, just gradually, just a little bit at a time. There are certain, as I know, Dr. Mack, and some of our listeners may as well, that there are certain theories of psychotherapy that suggest that if you're just there to support the person, they're the ones who will figure out and navigate how to grow through a thing and come out the other side in triumph. And so, so I would think that this question would be a really great example of that.
I would totally agree. Let me make sure, because that is all the questions through the Discord. I want to give so that we got through them all. So I will actually, and that actually works out because we're almost at 1 a.m. So you've been a real trooper hanging out here for an hour and a half this late in the evening.
Oh my gosh, so have you guys. This is my favorite topic. So this is like the most fun I could be having at 1 a.m. for the most part. I'm really excited. So thanks for having me, and truly, I really loved these questions. They made me so excited to come on tonight and talk with you all about this.
They really were great. And I am so grateful that you were willing to come on and talk about this. Perfectionism was requested back when I solicited, I was like, what are types of things that y'all would want to have talked about on stream? And people said perfectionism, and I immediately thought of you. So I'm so grateful that you were willing to come on. I think, as I said, you're the first of hopefully many interviews that I have, and at some point, if there are follow-ups for you, who knows? Maybe we'll get around too. It'd be pretty cool. But I'm really, really, really grateful that you came on this late to hang out with us and to be a part of this. It really means a lot to me, and I really loved listening to you talk about it. And I know, judging by the way that people have talked in the stream, they really loved listening to you talk about it too. So thank you so much for doing this.